When I covered the Sussex's latest faux Australian tour a couple of weeks ago, I had briefly mentioned the concept of soft diplomacy, the pivotal role that it plays in royal tours, and how Meghan and Harry's tours, in stark contrast, serve nobody but themselves. I had also mentioned that the royal fashion choices made on these tours serve as a visual, tangible representation of this soft diplomacy. Upon concluding that video, when I was editing it, I found myself becoming curious and curiouser about this whole fashion aspect and all the detail that surely goes into it. So I did some reading and found out that there is so much more when it comes to these outfits. You know those iceberg videos where they delve into all the details that you can't see because we can only see the tip of the iceberg? That's basically what you can expect from learning about all the meticulous detail and research that goes into perfecting these outfits that may seem frivolous on the face of it, but communicate so much more. So we've talked about in the past the main point of international royal tours, especially today, which is the promotion of the monarchy's own strategic and economic interests abroad. And it's largely done through soft diplomacy. That is, establishing, maintaining, and/or improving relations with other nations. The tours are not supposed to be about the actual individuals on tour, but are rather about representation of the monarchy and its country, which is really what a royal's job is all about. They are an ambassador. Now, as I have learned over the past couple of years of covering royalty, there are several elements that go into the smooth implementation of this soft diplomacy, most of which are above my pay grade, peasant that I am. But one of these elements is attire. We can all agree, I hope, that respect is an integral component to forming good and long-standing relationships, may it be between individuals on the one hand and entire nations on the other. When it comes to fashion, respect can be communicated through thoughtful and appropriate choices. If things look inappropriate considering the host nation's customs, or if they look bad, so they're poorly tailored or they're not ironed, they're stained, etc., then it not only makes the royal and therefore their country look bad, but it could also come across as rude and disrespectful to the host nation itself because it signals that they're simply not worth the effort. I like to think that any self-respecting individual, royal or not, who also respects their surroundings and other people around them, aim to put their best foot forwards, both literally in this instance and figuratively, whenever out in public. Royals most likely experience this tenfold, especially since they represent something far greater than themselves. If you thought that putting on any old outfit with a local designer label on it passes for royal diplomatic dressing a la Meghan Markle, then honey, much like I did a few days ago, you're about to learn. These things are planned months in advance, with the relevant royals dressing team meticulously researching the host country's culture, how the locals dress, local designers, the temperature, the climate, favored colors, and how much the relevant royals should reference all of this in their clothing while still maintaining an air of regality and style. Notable examples include Catherine, the then Duchess of Cambridge. As part of the Diamond Jubilee, William and Catherine had traveled to Singapore, amongst other countries, and when she arrived, Catherine was wearing a pale pink Jenny Packham dress. Now, upon first glance, it's just a pretty pale pink dress, perfectly fitted, perfectly tailored. She looks great. But here's where things are about to get incredibly detailed and impressive. The orchid is Singapore's national flower. And so what you see on the dress are orchids print. However, these weren't prints of just any old orchid. The designers referenced a purple and white orchid, which bore a striking resemblance to the orchid that can be found at the Singapore Botanic Gardens, which was named after the Cambridges, the Vanda William Catherine. Later on in 2016, during Catherine and William's trip of India and Bhutan, Catherine wore a red paisley Alexander McQueen dress. Now, first thing to note here is that red is a very important color in India, frequently used for important occasions and milestones like marriages or even the birth of a child. Once you get past the color, there's the pattern. The paisley pattern dates back to the 11th century in the Kashmir region of India. And then later, for an evening reception, Catherine wore a custom dress by Jenny Packham, her favorite designer, which featured intricate beading that had been done in India. Even the shawl and the skirt that she wore resembled a traditional Indian sari. Now, at the glimpse of an eye, at least for me, as someone who's admittedly not a professional in fashion history and culture, I would not have known any of these things simply by looking at the dress. Going back further in history to Princess Diana's tour of the Middle East in 1986, a note that was written by the late Princess Diana's lady-in-waiting at the time gives us some insight into just how much thought is given to all the wardrobe planning. The climate in the first three countries will range from cool British spring to a good British summer, and in Saudi Arabia could be hot and humid. In all cases, modesty is the order of the day, with sleeves to the elbow, necklines discreet, and skirts fairly full to just below the knee or longer. Much more recently, during the King and Queen's trip to the US. For a state dinner on Tuesday evening, Queen Camilla went for a magenta Fiona Clare evening gown. Fiona Clare is one of her favorite designers. But yet again, upon first glance, the color of this dress, while striking, didn't necessarily communicate anything deeper to me. It turns out, though, that in coordination with the First Lady, who wore a paler pink, the choice of color seemed to be a nod to the famous cherry blossoms of Washington, D.C. Then, on top of the cultural references, is the practicality aspect of it. For the late Queen Elizabeth II's 1953 tour of the Commonwealth, which lasted 6 months, 100 outfits were specifically designed for her by designers Sir Norman Hartnell and Hardy Amies, forgive me. With the former, Sir Hartnell, having designed both the Queen's wedding dress and coronation gown. In relation to the planning for the 1953 tour, he had famously relayed to the New York Times the importance of the size of her hats. Her hat couldn't be too big that it obscures her face or gets blown off in the wind. It had to be just right for her to be able to accept bouquets in one hand and shake hands with the other. Princess Diana, too, once said about her 1983 Australia tour, the wardrobe for which was researched and designed by Catherine Walker, "You'd be amazed at what one has to worry about. You've got to put your arm up to get some flowers, so you can't have something too revealing." Which would explain why, at only 22 at the time, she was dressed in quite a conservative style, long sleeves and high collars for the tour. She clearly didn't mind though, because she was very happy to rewear many of the same clothes for her Canadian tour soon after. Something which one of her daughters-in-law doesn't seem to be quite keen on. Speaking of which, Meghan too has had a few of these near perfectly curated outfits back when she toured Australia in 2018 as an actual royal on an actual official tour. A notable example is the blue cape gown that she wore to her very first state banquet in Fiji, made by British label Safia. Now, it's a British label, she was working as a British Duchess, but the nod is in the color itself, described as Fijian blue. Of course, she then had to ruin everything by throwing on a pair of blood diamonds dangling off her ears against the advice of her palace staff. If you don't know the story behind these diamonds, they were gifted to her by MBS of Saudi Arabia, who had at the time already been outed as being responsible for the butchering of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. During the same tour for her arrival in Tonga, she wore a red dress specifically chosen to reflect the red of the country's flag. Yet again, however, the moment was ruined by the fact that the dress's tag was dangling off its bottom in clear display for everyone watching. Even the white sheath dress she wore on her first day in Sydney in 2018, designed by Australian designer Karen Gee, was a great choice for her. Not only was it tailored and it was appropriate and the color complemented her, it looked great, but its name, called the Blessed Dress, was clearly a nod, as these fashion people like to say, to the fact that they were pregnant with Archie. Having said that, there was so much that Meghan and or her team got terribly wrong during that tour. You had the messy trench coats with her sleeves crumpled up. Despite being designed by an Australian designer, Martin Grant, this was just not doing his trench any favors. There was that awfully embarrassing see-through skirt incident in New Zealand, which they tried to explain away as an illusion, but it's pretty clear what went wrong here. There were also impractical choices that were far too revealing for a senior working royal on the job. When you're working, you're meant to look professional, especially when you're representing an entire nation and its monarchy. She can do whatever she wants in her own time, dress as revealing as she wants. This was just not the right time. Then there were the out-of-place, extravagant ball gowns, an issue which wasn't too prevalent in Australia, but one that she perpetuated with a vengeance during her next royal tour in Morocco while she was pregnant, where she not only wore exorbitantly expensive designer dresses, but utterly failed to reflect the host nation's culture. While the silhouettes were arguably fitting, considering she was pregnant and the conservative nature of the country she was visiting, the designers were European and American fashion houses, such as Dior, Valentino, and Carolina Herrera. From what I've observed, that's the central issue with Meghan Markle. She doesn't seem to comprehend that royal tours are not a commercial venture to flaunt oneself, but to represent something far greater than any one individual. We've seen this me, myself, and I mentality playing out through her wardrobe choices for years. Whether as a working royal or now as a merching one, she dresses for herself first and foremost, as opposed to dressing for the role. Add that to the fact that she is so ignorant about the point of royal tours, and you've got yourself a veritable disaster. A cursory look at the clothing choices Meghan proudly claims to have made on her own these past few cosplaying royal tours tells us that, much like her shallow understanding or lack of understanding of soft diplomacy, she seems to think that simply slapping on a local designer label is enough of a nod to the host country, regardless of that country's history, culture, and norms. This was painfully evident during their trip to Nigeria, where she paraded around practically half naked the entire trip. And when she did choose to highlight a local designer, which she failed to do at almost every event, by the way, choosing American and Colombian designers for most of her wardrobe, she still managed to pick the least appropriate, possibly last-minute choice to feature, which again doesn't do the local designers any favors. And aside from that is the problem of presentation. When royals dress up, the point is not just to pay homage to the host or visiting country, but to make all parties involved look good. Meaning attention is paid to details, such as the best fabrics to use to prevent or minimize creases and stains. Things are tailored, often multiple times, to fit perfectly, and the colors that best flatter the wearer are chosen over less flattering ones. Again, Meghan seems to think that simply throwing on an outfit with a Nigerian or Colombian or Australian designer label on it is simply enough. Whether it creases or stains or fits well or flatters her skin tone is apparently beside the point. Now, don't get me wrong, things can and do go wrong for other working royals as well. Even the monarchs themselves are not immune to not only making mistakes, but being critiqued over them. Take, for instance, the late Queen Elizabeth II's visit to Canada in 1984, where she was criticized by local newspapers in Toronto for looking tired and dowdy. Mind you, she was already 58 years old at this point, and Princess Diana had already made a splash in the fashion world as a young woman in her early 20s. So there really was no fair comparison to be made. But still, the media pit them against each other, and the Queen took it to heart, trying much harder and succeeding 2 years later on a visit to the Great Wall of China, where her clothes appeared to be far better tailored and more flattering. Catherine also had her share of oopsies, particularly very early in her marriage when she didn't have a stylist yet and relied instead on herself, her mother, and personal shoppers to pull together a wardrobe for her tour of North America. The difference lies in the attitude. These royals that I've mentioned, while making mistakes in the past, appear to learn from them and strive at least to never repeat them again. Of course, having a team of professionals around you helps immensely, but you also have to be open-minded and humble enough to accept that you don't know everything, you're only human, and you're going to make mistakes, which is something that Meghan Markle is unfortunately incapable of doing. Because here she is, 8 years since her first official royal tour, having clearly learned nothing. She never was an original woman. We know she's always had a flair for imitation. But even her attempts at doing that are poor, because she either never cares to or is incapable of understanding, truly, deeply understanding whatever subject matter it is that she chooses to dabble in or imitate. Whether she's play cooking in a kitchen or cosplaying as a working royal, the imitation game is surface level at best, and that's why she and Prince Harry never manage to fully deliver. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Also, before I go, if you like what we're doing here on this channel and would like to support us further, then do consider visiting the link to Patreon in the description box below. I upload ad-free versions of all my videos, and when time allows, some exclusive content that is either not allowed on YouTube or I'm just not going to put on YouTube. Thank you so much in advance if you do choose to support me. I still love you if you don't, and I'll see you next time. Take care.